Chapter 3 of The Automobile Girls at Newport by Laura Crane. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Ruth's Perfect Plan. Wonderment over the mystery of the money and excited anticipation of Ruth Stewart's luncheon and plan kept the Thurston girls from getting to sleep very early that night. They awoke bright and fresh next morning, nevertheless. Just before 11, they started on their 2-mile tramp to the hotel. They were hardly out of sight of the house, however, when what should they see but the now familiar red car speeding toward them. "Look! Yes, it is!" cried Molly. "Ruth herself is making it go." The young driver waved a free hand for a second as she neared them, then wheeled in a broad turn and stopped. "I was so afraid you might have started," she protested tactfully, "for it is such a fine morning for a nice leisurely walk. I was so anxious to see you that I simply couldn't wait, and I told Dad I'd take the bubble and spin out to meet you. Now won't you please hop in and ride back with me?" The girls hopped with delighted celerity, and Ruth turned back to them for a moment. "I have reams to talk about," she continued, "but to tell you the truth, I want my father to be with us when I begin. So now, if you don't mind, we'll just ride." Neither Molly nor Barbara will ever forget their first ride. "I felt as if I had chartered my own private flying machine, and I was sure the angels were jealous," Molly confessed, naively, at lunch. They reached the hotel very quickly, and after a cozy chat on the private balcony belonging to Ruth's tiny suite of rooms, found themselves seated around a little table in a cool, palm-shaded corner of the big dining room. Between them, opposite Ruth, sat big, blue-eyed, open-hearted Robert Stewart, Ruth's dad. Robert Stewart had made his fortune out west, in the mining country. That was how he started, anyway. For years now he had lived in Chicago, buying and selling real estate in the vicinity. There his wife had died, and there his 18-year-old daughter Ruth had spent nearly all her life. During the summers she had traveled more or less, and the last few years had frequently gone east. Her father's sister, Aunt Sally Stewart, had brought the girl up since her mother's death, which had occurred when Ruth was a little girl. Aunt Sally was not present at the luncheon because of a bad headache. "Grace Carter has come over and is staying with her, like a dear," Ruth explained. Later, if Auntie felt better, the girls were to go up to her room. Ruth, as has appeared, was an extremely impulsive young person. Fortunately, most of her impulses were inspired by a natural kindliness and a cheerful, youthful energy, with a stratum of good common sense at bottom. There was apt to be method in her madness. Her plan, for instance, had long been her desire, but before she had never seen the way. Ruth couldn't wait for the cold bouillon to be taken off. "Father, I want to tell them now," she exclaimed. After his cheerful, "Go ahead, daughter," she burst out, "Barbara, Molly, won't you go on an automobile tour to Newport with Grace Carter and me, with Aunt Sally for chaperone? Won't you? Can't you come?" While the amazed girls could only look at her and at each other, she hurried on. "Oh, yes, you probably think I'm crazy, but I'm not. You see, it's like this. All my life I have longed to travel by myself, at least with the people I want. Not in a train, or a big crowded boat. Dad knows the feeling. It's what makes him run away from Chicago, and get out on the prairies, and ride and ride and ride. I'm a girl, so I can't do that, or lots of things. But I can run an automobile. For 2 years I have just been waiting to get the right crowd. Grace is a dear, but I want 2 more. The other girls, I know, are all right to meet at dances and to see now and then, but they'd collapse at the thought of starting off on a lark like this. You 2, you're different. I knew it in the minute I saw you. Besides," she continued, "Grace has been telling me things about you. I always know right off whether I like anybody, and it doesn't take long to find out how much I like them. I like you both a whole lot, and I know we will have a perfectly delightful trip if you will go with me. If you don't, I simply can't go. That's all. It would be absurd setting off in that great machine with only Grace and Aunt Sally to rattle around like 2 peas in a pod. Daddy understands, and he likes you just the way I do. I can see it in his eyes. So it's up to you. Do you like me a little bit? Well, say enough to visit me in my automobile for a month or so? Oh, please say you do." She stopped, her voice catching impulsively over the last words. Barbara's eyes were shining. "I don't believe we need to tell you that," she said softly. "You must just know. But there's Mother, and we haven't the money." "Now, that's not fair," Ruth broke in. The money is out of the question altogether. You are my guests. Why, it's you who will do me the favor," she pleaded, as she caught the look of dissent on Barbara's face. "Remember, if you fail me, I can't have my trip at all, and I have been looking forward to it for 2 whole years. As for your mother, if she will consent to it, Dad and I have a beautiful plan, to keep her and Dad both from being lonely. Poor Dad is sick and tired of hotel cooking, and I told him all about your dear little cottage and the dandy tea and cookies your mother makes, and do you suppose your mother would let Dad take his meals with her while we are away? Then he won't be too wretched living all alone up here. Also, you wouldn't have to worry about your mother, nor would I have to worry about Dad. Aunt Sally has been with him so long that I don't know what he'd do all by himself. He could get on very well if only your mother would look after him at meals. I know that. Now I won't say another word about it for the rest of our lunch. Then we'll run in and call on Aunt Sally. Afterward, we will take the car out and see your mother, and get her to say yes. Then you'll say it too, won't you? But don't let's spoil this good chicken salad through worrying about it." In a more or less complete, yet altogether happy silence, the luncheon was finished. Ruth and her father did not try to force their guests to talk, realizing that the girls would want to think. From the smiling glances the two Stuarts exchanged now and then, it was evident they hoped the thinking would have a happy outcome. After the last course had been served, and the finger bowls, a sprig of rose geranium floated in each, had been pushed aside, Ruth said quietly, "Now we will go to see Aunt Sally for a few minutes. Daddy, you'll have the machine at the door?" The girls filed into the elevator, and soon were speeding down a long hall to Aunt Sally's suite, just across from Ruth's. The latter knocked softly, and Grace Carter came to the door. "Yes, ever so much better," Grace murmured, in reply to Ruth's whispered inquiry. "She wants you to be sure to come in with your friends before they go. Yes, I am sure she would be glad to see them now." As the girls entered the vestibule of the apartment, Grace gave Barbara's hand a furtive squeeze, and whispered, "I'll just never recover if you don't come." There was no chance for a reply, for a precise though rather kindly voice called from the room beyond, "Ruth, please bring your friends in here." With some trepidation the girls advanced toward Aunt Sally. She was a somewhat stout woman, who reclined on a couch in a handsome violet negligee. She scanned the girls sharply for a moment, then in her carefully enunciated syllables, which contrasted oddly with her smooth plump face, she said, "So you're the young ladies who stopped runaway horses. Well, I never could have done it when I was young, but I'm sure I am indebted to you, and I am happy to know you, my dears. I hope and trust, since my madcap niece is bound to take her trip, that you will come along to keep her company." The girls smiled, and Ruth murmured to them, "You see, you really must come for the sake of my family." Then Aunt Sally stretched out two plump jeweled hands, and remarked, "I am sure I shall see a great deal of you very soon, my dears, and you will see all you want to of me. So if you don't mind, I'll ask you to excuse me now. My head is so tired." "She likes to take a cat nap pretty often," explained irreverent Ruth, as soon as they were safely outside the door. "But Aunt Sally is a good sort just the same, and the best possible dragon for our trip. Your mother needn't be in the least afraid to trust you to her. Now for your mother," Ruth added as the girls entered the elevator. In front of the broad piazza the automobile waited on the driveway, with Mr. Stuart as chauffeur. "Pile in," he smiled, and in a trice the girls were whirled homeward once more. There a mighty conference was held. At first Mrs. Thurston simply gasped. Then she dumbly shook her head. Barbara and Molly both protested that nothing would persuade them to leave their mother against her wishes. As Ruth said afterwards, "Daddy did the whole thing. He explained to the girls and to their mother how brief the separation would be. To the mother he expatiated on the delights and educational value of such a trip. To the girls he hinted, delicately, that perhaps the little mother would get a bit of rest all by herself for a few weeks, even with him to take care of. To all present, Mr. Stuart enlarged upon the duty of charity toward him, a homeless vacation visitor, starving from eating only hotel food, and toward his daughter, a sisterless girl with a longing for friends. Though the Thurstons shook their heads, between smiles and tears, at the absurdity of these arguments, they finally said a grateful "Yes." "One really doesn't need any clothes except veils and dusters for an automobile trip, and I have a big extra stock of those," concluded Ruth. "I want to run up here for you people. Let me see, to day is Friday. Next Monday morning. That's such a nice day to start." "Yes," again cried Molly and Barbara. The girls joined hands and made a low curtsy to Mrs. Thurston and Mr. Stewart. "Allow me to introduce you," said Ruth in her most impressive voice, "to the automobile girls on their way to Newport." "Long may they flourish," concluded Mr. Stewart, turning to the girls' mother. "I'll come up with Ruth and help you start them off, Mrs. Thurston. Then, if I may, I will come back and have lunch with you later in the day." "Till Monday," called Ruth, and the machine whirled off. Barbara and Molly watched it from the gate. I wish I could do something for them," mused Barbara, her chin sunk in her hand, her brown eyes showing that soft brightness that only came to them when she was greatly moved. How well she was to repay the Stewart kith and kin, she could not then guess. CHAPTER